You have money in your bank account right now, maybe a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, maybe more. You probably think that money is sitting somewhere, in a vault, in a server, in some digital ledger with your name on it. It is not. And the uncomfortable part is not that the money is gone. The uncomfortable part is that in a very specific and legally sanctioned way, it was never fully there to begin with. This is not a conspiracy. This is not a fringe theory passed around on the internet at 2 a.m. This is how the banking system was designed to work. It is taught in economics departments. It is documented by central banks. The Bank of England published a paper about it in 2014 and said it plainly. And yet most people will go their entire lives using this system every single day without ever understanding the trick at the center of it. So let us talk about it. Let us start somewhere simple. You are 10 years old. You have $20. Your friend needs $10 and promises to pay you back next week. You lend it. Now you have $10 in your pocket and a promise worth $10 in your head. In your mind, you still have $20, but only 10 of them are real in any physical sense. That feeling, that gap between what exists and what is believed to exist, that is the seed of everything we are about to talk about. Now scale that up by about $100 trillion. Here is a question almost nobody asks out loud. When you take out a loan, where does the bank get the money it lends you? The obvious answer seems like it should be from other people's deposits. Someone put money in, the bank holds it, the bank lends it out. Simple. But that is not what happens. Not really. Not in the way you are imagining. The actual answer is both simpler and stranger. The bank creates it. Not metaphorically. Not as an accounting trick that ultimately traces back to real money somewhere. The bank literally types a number into a ledger, and that number becomes money. Your loan is not taken from someone else's savings. It is new money, born the moment you sign the paperwork. This is called credit creation. Some people call it money multiplication. The technical term is fractional reserve banking. Whatever you call it, the mechanism is the same. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a bank the same way again. Let us build this from the ground up. Imagine there is a town, brand new town. No money exists yet. A central bank prints $1,000 and gives it to a local bank to get things started. A farmer walks in and deposits that $1,000. Now the bank has $1,000 in deposits. Here is where it gets interesting. The bank is not required to keep all of that money sitting idle. It is required to keep a fraction of it, hence the name fractional reserve. In many systems, that fraction is around 10%. So the bank keeps $100 in reserve and is now legally permitted to lend out $900. A carpenter comes in, needs $900 to buy tools. The bank does not hand over the farmer's money. The bank opens a new account for the carpenter and types $900 into it. That $900 did not come from the farmer's deposit. It came from the bank's authority to create a loan. Now here's the part that makes your head tilt. The carpenter takes that $900 and deposits it into the same bank or another one. Now the system has $1,000 in the first account and $900 in the second. The bank keeps $90 in reserve and lends out $810 to someone else, who deposits it, who gets it lent again, on and on. $1,000 of original printed money has now become, through this chain of deposits and loans, nearly $10,000 of money circulating in the economy. The original amount multiplied nearly 10 times. None of those extra dollars were printed. None of them came from a vault. They came from the act of lending itself. This is the trick, and it is completely legal. In fact, it is the engine of the entire modern economy. Now here is where the numbers get uncomfortable. In 2023, the total amount of physical currency in circulation in the United States, actual paper bills and coins, was roughly $2 trillion. The total money supply, meaning the deposits, the loans, the numbers in accounts that people treat as money, was closer to $21 trillion. That gap, that $19 trillion gap between what is printed and what is believed to exist, that is credit creation at scale. That is fractional reserve banking doing what it was designed to do. And it is not just America. Every major economy on Earth operates this way. The Bank of England, again, said it directly. In the modern economy, commercial banks, not the central bank, create the vast majority of money in circulation, not by printing, by lending, which means something worth sitting with for a moment. Most of the money in the world today was created by a bank approving a loan. Your mortgage, that money was created. Your car loan, created. The corporate bond your pension fund holds. The credit card balance from last November. All of it. New money, born from the act of borrowing. Now someone in the back of the room is raising their hand. If banks can just create money, why do they ever run out? Why do banks fail? Why did 2008 happen? Fair question. Sharp question. Here's the answer. The system works beautifully when people believe in it, and it falls apart with terrifying speed when they stop. Banks create money, yes, but they cannot create trust, and the entire architecture depends on trust being present at all times. Go back to our imaginary town. The farmer deposited $1,000. The bank created $900 for the carpenter. But if the farmer walks in tomorrow and wants his $1,000 back, the bank can give it to him because it kept that 100 in reserve, and the rest is still technically there in the form of a loan that will be repaid. But what if 10 farmers walk in at once? What if everyone who has money in the bank wants it at the same time? The bank cannot pay them all because the money, most of it, does not physically exist yet. It is out in the world as loans, as promises, as numbers in accounts that will only become real when someone pays them back. This is called a bank run, and it is the nightmare that every bank, every central bank, every financial regulator on earth is always quietly preparing for. In 2008, something close to this happened. Not with individual depositors running to ATMs, though that happened too, but with banks running on each other. Banks had lent money to other banks, created credit for institutions that had used that credit to create more credit. Layers of money built on promises, built on other promises. And when enough of those underlying promises turned out to be bad, specifically millions of American homeowners who could not repay their mortgages, the whole architecture started shaking. The government stepped in with hundreds of billions of dollars, not to punish the system, to save it, because the alternative, a complete collapse of confidence in the money in everyone's accounts, was too catastrophic to allow. The trick only works if everyone agrees not to look too closely at the same time. Let us zoom out even further. Here is a thought experiment. If money is mostly created through loans, then for money to exist in the economy, someone, somewhere, must be in debt. Not just some people, everyone, structurally, permanently. The existence of your bank balance, mathematically, requires that someone else owes something. This is not a political statement. It is an arithmetic one. When a bank creates a loan, it creates both an asset and a liability at the same time. The loan is the bank's asset. Your debt is your liability. And the money in your account, the number you see when you check your balance, that is the bank's liability to you. All of it is promises. All of it is mutual debt dressed up as money. In this system, total debt can never be zero. If it were, there would be almost no money. The economy would stop, which is why governments never really try to eliminate debt. When politicians say they want to pay off the national debt, they do not mean what it sounds like. Because a world with no debt is a world with almost no money. And a world with almost no money is a world where nobody can pay for anything. The debt is the system. Now let us talk about the part nobody likes to say out loud. Banks create money when they lend. That is the power at the center of the system. But here is what that power actually means in practice. It means banks decide where money comes into existence. Not governments, not voters, not some democratic process. Banks. When a bank approves your mortgage, it is not just approving your loan. It is approving the creation of new money. When a bank declines a small business loan in a low-income neighborhood, it is not just declining credit. It is choosing not to create money there. The pattern of credit creation is also a pattern of power. Money flows where banks decide it flows. Communities that get loans grow. Communities that do not, do not. This is not a coincidence. It is the mechanism. And before you think this is a modern problem, fractional reserve banking in various forms has existed for centuries. The Medici banks in 15th century Florence were running early versions of this. The goldsmiths of 17th century England discovered that they could issue more receipts for gold than they actually had gold, because not everyone would come for it at once. They were lending receipts that represented money that did not exist yet. They were doing what JP Morgan does today. The trick is old, the scale is new. There is one more layer to this. In recent decades, central banks, the banks that sit above all the other banks, have added their own version of this mechanism. It is called quantitative easing, and while it is technically different from fractional reserve lending, it rhymes with it in important ways. When the Federal Reserve wants to stimulate the economy, it does not print money in the way most people imagine. It does not fire up a printing press. It creates reserves electronically and uses those reserves to buy assets, usually government bonds, from banks. The banks receive new reserves. They can use those reserves to support more lending. More lending means more money created. Between 2008 and 2022, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet grew from under $1 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. The European Central Bank did something similar. So did the Bank of Japan. So did the Bank of England. $9 trillion. Created through keyboard entries, to buy bonds, to inject reserves, to encourage lending, to create more money, on top of the money that already was not quite real. And for a while, it seemed to work. Stock markets recovered. Economies grew. The system held. Then inflation came, and suddenly the distance between the real economy and the financial scaffolding built over it became very visible. Prices rose not just because of supply chain problems, though that was part of it, but because there was simply more money chasing the same number of things. That money had been created over the previous decade and a half, and was now showing up in grocery bills and rent prices and the cost of used cars. The trick, it turns out, has consequences. They just arrive slowly, and then all at once. So where does this leave you? You put money in a bank. The bank lends most of it out. That lending creates new money. That new money gets deposited somewhere else, gets lent again. The cycle continues. The total amount of money in the world grows. Your slice of it, in real terms, stays the same or shrinks, depending on how fast new money is being created relative to the size of the economy. You are not just a customer of this system. You are a participant in it. Your deposits are part of the fuel. Your loans are acts of money creation. Every time you borrow, you add to the total supply. Every time you pay back a loan, you destroy money. Paying off debt does not return money to a vault. It extinguishes it, makes it not exist again. The money supply breathes. It expands with credit. It contracts with repayment. It panics when trust collapses. It inflates when trust runs too hot. And somewhere in the middle of all of that breathing, you are trying to save enough for a house. Here is the question worth leaving you with. We have built a global economy on a system where most money is created by private institutions through the act of lending for profit. The expansion of money depends on the expansion of debt. The health of the system depends on permanent, compounding borrowing. What happens when the borrowing stops? Not because of a crash, not because of a crisis, just because at some point, the debt becomes too heavy. Because households and governments and corporations look at what they owe and decide they cannot take on more. What happens to an economy where money creation slows to a halt because nobody wants to borrow anymore? We do not fully know. It has not happened cleanly in modern history. Every time it threatens to happen, central banks step in, governments step in, new forms of stimulus are invented, new mechanisms for keeping the engine running. But the question sits there, a system that requires infinite debt to function in a world with finite everything else. The trick works until the audience figures out they are part of the trick too.